knowing the system, understanding how you work, then optimizing within your own abilities.
Welcome to Ultrahabits. Here, we go under the hood with our guests to unpack the minutiae and to understand what processes and systems they engage or research that result in ultra-enhanced living.
Sara, welcome to Ultrahabits. I have finally roped you into the show. You're a very, very difficult woman to pin down, but I'm so happy that you are joining us this morning here in Australia. How are you?
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, look, I'm a fan of your work. I read
Thanks.
Take a Nap, Change Your Life some time ago, and the context behind that is I was running ultra marathons and training 20 or 30, 40 Ks sometimes in the morning before work, 4:30. And I just could not get beyond 10 a.m. with my brain functioning well. And I was like, well, look, I can't keep pumping coffees into me. I've got to shift something or else I just can't sustain this. And that's when I really started to dive into the competitive advantage of sleeping. So you've written a new book and we're talking about the power of the downstate. So can you explain to our audience what is the downstate? Like, what is that?
Yeah, thanks. Well, thanks a lot for the shout out to Take a Nap, Change Your Life. That was a while ago, and I still think, it's amazing. It's still relevant. I thought at that time, well, of course, people are going to start downstating. People are going to start napping. It's a perfect little thing to do in the middle of the day, but still, it's, you still have to convince people to take a break. So this book, The Power of the Downstate, the idea is that the downstate is all of the restorative activities that we need to do on a daily basis to keep ourselves fit and full of energy and decrease our stress, and then make it so that we can actually get benefits from sleep at night so that we're not getting to bed so stressed out, and really creating, understanding that we are rhythmic animals, just like every plant and animal on the planet. We are based on rhythms, and that these rhythms mean that we have an upstate where we're optimized for energy expenditure and being active and running ultramarathons. And then we immediately after that, there's going to be a downstate where we need to do some deep replenishing work. And that's where the downstate happens. And so, of course, we've spent so much time thinking about the downstate as just sleep. But my recent research looking in the autonomic nervous system and how you can really manipulate and kind of work with your own cycles to achieve more of that really strong positive downstate shows that you can get downstates during the day, and that you can optimize your training schedules, your exercise schedules, your eating schedules to get even more out of your downstate at night.
When I got sober, so I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, they used to talk about this acronym called HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. And I started to really realize how what we called alcoholic thinking really became quite prevalent when I had lack of sleep, paranoia, just really what we call stinking thinking. And I'm actually of the belief, and this might be a huge statement, that a lot of what we perceive as mental health issues, now not pathology, like just basic shit, is just a lack of sleep. What would you say to that statement?
I mean, if you look at studies of kids, right? So kids are sleeping less than they ever have before. And they need way more sleep than they're getting. Their brains are developing, their moods are developing, their hormones are developing, their emotion regulation strategies are developing. And what you see is that that there's a very large increase in diagnosis of ADHD and that kind of, those kind of behaviors that are, internalized behaviors such as depression and anxiety, but also externalized behaviors, lack of inhibition, not listening to your parents, not doing what you're told. And so there's studies where people take these kids and just have them stay in bed for 10 hours. and they have to stay in bed for 10 hours. And that's the whole study. And what they find is a decrease in those symptoms of ADHD that, prior to the study, they were being diagnosed. And after the study, they had fewer diagnoses and they had fewer symptoms. So that quality of increasing sleep has so many implications, right? It's not just about, we study cognition, but then we study emotion, and then there's also your heart rate, and there's also your recovery from the day and your recovery from your emotional experiences that day. And you need sleep for all those things. And so for sure, and that's the same as, for adults as it is for adolescents, we don't sleep enough to make up for all of the stuff that we do during the day that's stressful.
Yeah, I find it ironic that, in our drive to survive as a humanity or human race, we've created these comforts and we've created infrastructure to how we live our life. But in many ways, that's locked us into this kind of way of being, which is moved us away from our natural state. And now we're trying to get back to that natural state. So in many ways, by creating what we perceive as comforts through, and I would say that,
conveniences, comforts, things to make it faster and easier. Yeah.
Right.
We've stopped chopping our own vegetables. We've stopped paying attention to the strongest circadian indicator on the planet, the sun. There's so many things that, that kind of natural rhythm of your own daily life cycle, or daily cycle and life cycle. We've stopped paying attention to all of those signals. And I think you're right. It's taken us away, and it actually is more stressful, right? Because now we have to actually think through and make up for things that should naturally be taken care of, right? That if we paid attention to those natural cycles, it would actually mean less thinking on our part. We wouldn't need all these different conveniences, right? Because we would just be doing something that was already in sync with a natural cycle.
This may be hard for you to answer, but I'm going to ask you this question anyways. We talk about the prehistoric human, or the human prior to the Industrial Revolution, or even way before that, like when there's an existential threat of a lion or a tiger. Do you think that individual, albeit there was some real existential threats, they had a better regulated autonomic system than we do today? Like, surely that would have been a more stressful way of living in many ways. What's your opinion on that? I know it's such
a great question, right? Because there's constantly that sort of thought of, oh, it was so much better back in the day, right? But then you have Steven Pinker saying, no, we are way less violent now. We have way more ability to, self-determine. And so there's differences in terms of the, personal freedoms, personal being able to, my job is just to sit and think, right? Like that probably didn't happen in paleo times, right? Like that's pretty push.
Pretty good
right?
gig.
Yeah,
gig,
exactly,
Sarah. Yeah, right.
exactly. So there's a lot to be gained from modern medicine. I mean, give me a break. That's really the best. And we've also gotten into some sort of levels of denial that we are animals, right? And so probably back in the day, there were, I've been watching all these Viking shows on Netflix, and there's probably a lot more danger, the plague, and marauding hordes of people who came with axes. Like there was just a lot more daily fears or daily stresses, I would say. But there was also probably a lot more robustness, right? That people were stronger, right? That they could just, they first of all, they were out all day long working, right? There was a lot more physical labor just as part of their jobs. People live longer now, but do they live longer into, deep health longer? I don't know. Like it's a good question, right? So of course people lived till they were 40, and that was an old age. So it's hard to kind of have that rosy glow and think back and think it was better, because there were so many things that are great now. But I also think we are not so far out of touch with these natural rhythms that we can't just access them, but they take, as much as our frontal lobes are the brain areas that have brought us away from our natural state, it's exactly those areas of self-regulation and decision-making and control that allow you to actually say, well, I'm going to actually now go back to those states and pick up the benefits.
Yeah, this may sound crazy, but when I started running ultras and running, particularly in the trail, I live in the bush and we have our own veggie and fruit garden and we do our own stuff. And when I'm running out in the bush or when I'm out there, it feels like I'm supposed to be there. Like there's a deep sense of connection there. And I'm not talking in an airy fairy way. Like there is something there where it's a spiritual experience. Like I feel like that's the state I'm supposed to be in, and that's where I'm actually supposed to be. And as soon as my feet hit the dirt, and this isn't the function of endorphins because I'm not running yet, but as soon as my feet hit the dirt, there is an immediate psychological freedom that occurs from just being out there. And the Japanese have these forest baths, and like there's a real relevance in moving back to our natural state. And one of the things I love about your message, because I have intuitively started to realize this over the last years, is the advantage of working in waves, right? So I work hard and I push myself and then I pull out. And pulling out is actually physically pulling out. My environment where I live, everything is very much separated from the chaos of the matrix, as I call it. And for me, I needed to create that physical barrier because it reminds me, as soon as I'm driving up the mountain to home, to kind of just start to switch off.
Go into your downstate.
Into the downstate. So that's what I want to get back to. So we're talking about the downstate. Conversely, what's the upstate then?
Well, the upstate is where you are stressed, right? The upstate is, and it's actually where you can tolerate stress. It's where you're most supported by your physiology, by your energy levels, by your brain power to deal with the world, right? That it's actually, and that's, I think, the part of a key to sort of thinking about that there are these natural things like the sun that gives you this natural upstate during the day and the moon, the downstate at night. But there's also, and that our brains and our metabolism and our muscles are primed to have the most amount, the highest metabolism. Your frontal lobe is at its best working power levels, if I can say that, in the morning at the same time that you have the metabolism high. Your muscles are ready and well, they can adapt to actually many different time periods, but your cardiovascular system is working at its height in the morning as well, in that daytime. So there are some natural periods that we have that we're primed and we're supported to experience the upstate. And so that's part of the idea, is that, can you create, schedule your day, create your behaviors that align with getting the most out of your upstate. And then at the same time, taking time to bring stuff down during the day as well, right? Because, we do a lot of stressful things during the day. And we have this kind of tendency to just ramp up. Our stress just ramps up across the entire day. And by the end of the day, we are kind of exhausted, right? We've been spent. A lot of people who, sit at the computer every day or have to run around and take care of a lot of things, like, there isn't a lot of time in the day to really take a break. And so the idea is, well, if you keep ramping up all day long, once you get to your bedtime and you expect the bedtime to be the time where all of that downstate happens to take care of the upstate, that's probably not feasible, right? It's asking too much of sleep, and it's even hard to get to sleep when you're so wired. So along with kind of working your your own personal behaviors so that you can kind of push a lot of the energy depleting activities to the daytime when you have this natural upstate, can you also take moments during the day to bring yourself down to a calmer place, so that you are self-regulating and allowing yourself to do some deep breathing, and going into nature, truly going into nature. I think that we undersell, we underappreciate that we are natural animals. And at that moment that you said that you just kind of get your feet on the ground and you start, I think of so many people who live in cities and how rare it is for people who live in cities to just be in a forest, right? To be at a beach or to be somewhere, we don't have enough parks, right? We don't have enough of that natural experience because it does just bring you straight down, right? It just brings you to this place of calm that we need. We need more of that stuff.
Sometimes I don't realize how much I'm on the edge until I get out there. And I almost kind of, as soon as my feet hit the dirt, like I'm almost in tears, right? Like, because it's like, fuck, I can breathe, right? And yeah, it's incredible. How does an individual know or learn their ideal integration process between upstate and downstate? Like, is that personal? And do you feel that out, or like, how does a person kind
to
of?
me, it's actually, there are, of course, going to be differences in terms of like when exactly is people's upstate and downstates. But I think there are some real universals, like we know for the majority of people, if you think about eating, your metabolism is at its height in the day, and your insulin, which is the stuff that brings the glucose into your cells, that's allows you to get the most efficient processing out of your food, right? That's at its height during the day, and then by afternoon it starts to decrease, and that's pretty universal across most people. So by then, once your insulin starts to decrease across the day, eating later and later in the evening means that you're leaving more of those sugars in your blood and not being used into your organs, right? And so that's going to be turned into fat, right? That's not actually going to be useful energy. So even though, there's a lot of sort of like, I want to have my own individual plan. And I also kind of think, but you don't have to, like that's a lot of work that you're doing to try to think about like, what's my individual. You could also just try to like sink into these natural rhythms that are already there. And, the idea of front loading your calories, right? Like if you could get 50% of your calories in during the day between like 9 and noon or whatever, right? Then that means that you're having less and less food across the evening. And that's also going to affect your sleep, because the later you eat, the further you push your melatonin onset, right? Melatonin is the sleep hormone. So there's all these systems affect each other. So even though I think that, everybody wants to have their own, tailor-made system, is the same with exercise. Like exercise, if you're doing an intense exercise, that's going to spike your sympathetic nervous system, what I call rev. It's going to rev you up. It doesn't matter who you are. That happens, right? If you're a super, fit, well-trained person, it doesn't spike it as much, and you've got to really push yourself to get a maximum spike. But you want that spike, right? You want that because that means that afterwards you're going to have a super strong restorative response and recovery from the parasympathetic system. But the timing of that, exercise, that intense exercise, that cardiovascular push, that is going to be universal, because in terms of when that's going to happen, you do your intense HIIT exercise, you do your intense run, and that sympathetic revved up response is going to happen right at that moment, and it's going to decline depending on your fitness at some sort of regular decline. And so pushing that to as early in the day as possible is going to mean that your sleep won't get disturbed, but also that restorative response that comes afterwards is going to coincide with your slow wave sleep, because, and that's that deep sleep and then those two systems are going to resonate, and you're going to have a more restorative response. So there are small variations in individuals, but overall, you're just an animal, and you have just these responses. And across the day, when you're awake, when you get to sleep, the first sleep you get is always going to be slow wave sleep. That's just what happens, right? So in general, it's like, yeah, I like the idea of everyone doing what works for them. And at the same time, there's a lot of things you don't need to overthink, because it's just part of the natural system. It's part of the natural rhythms of the day.
What's the implication for shift workers with all this? Like, we talk about shift workers, doctors, people working at night, like high risk, right? Like we look at communities where, like Alaska, and where it's like daytime for 6 months and people are going crazy. Like, what's the implication for people that aren't or don't work with the natural rhythms of life? Have you gone into that?
Yeah, in the book, I talk a lot about this issue, particularly the problem with light at night. So we know, from many years of work right now showing that shift work isn't great, right? It's not healthy. It causes increased risk for metabolic disorders, cardiovascular problems. It even, has been related to some increases in cancer rates. So, but a lot of people need to shift work. It's not, so it's like a privileged thing to say, just don't do it, So obviously people shift work, and they're going to continue to shift work because we have a 24/7 culture. So the question is, how can you best adapt to a schedule that is maybe not perfectly aligned with your own biological rhythm? So there's lots of things that can be done. One of the things that people say is that is very helpful is to stay on that shift work schedule as much as possible, even when you're not working. And one of the problems is that people, they might work at night, and then they'll have a whole bunch of things they want to do in the day and be with their kids. But then they're switching midweek, right, between being up at night and being up in the day, and it's the long haul of that is not going to work. So there are, the idea is, what can you do to maintain, if you're going to be on that schedule and this is your life, then do your best to maintain a flipped schedule all the time.
Yeah.
And also, and that means during the day, if you are exposed to bright light, wear sunglasses, wear blue light blockers, because it's truly the blue light that is the most influential for your circadian rhythm. There's all sorts of things people can do to create spaces that are dark enough. And then also use napping, right? Use napping at specific times prior to the work, so that you are fit and ready for working when you should be. And you haven't been up all day doing life and then try to work all night, right? But take that prophylactic nap, which is a nap before work, so that you can actually be alert and not be a danger to yourself and others during the shift work. So there's lots of things that people, that corporations should be doing for people who do shift work, right? It's really, I think the onus should be on the companies who are creating shift work opportunities. And then, then you got to support the people who are in that state.
Are you finding corporates, particularly in places, I guess, like the Silicon Valley, are acknowledging sleep and creating space for that? Like, are you engaging more with corporates that seem to have their shit together when it comes to sleep, or is this a real slow roll?
I think that there's some kind of smaller companies that are kind of into it, or like the Googles that say things like that. But to me, it's just, it's not part of, clearly the culture where we have, where was it, Amazon recently? There was something where, there was obviously a very toxic culture that was, that you had to be available 24/7, and, the phone constantly by you, and have to acknowledge your boss's 3 a.m. email at 3 a.m. So I think that there may be sort of a nod to sort of get people to take a job, but I think that the truth is that we're not anywhere near where we could be, in terms of really considering people's rhythms. I think the pandemic in some cases was great for people because they got to just experience their own rhythms for, even though there was a lot of fear and terror, which wasn't good. And there was a lot of, the upset of all of our rhythms. We had things established, and then the sudden pandemic that threw everything up in the air was terrifying. But then there was a moment where it's like, well, okay, no one's telling me when to be to work, and no one's telling me, and some people have kids, and all that stuff that had to also be managed. But a lot of people really found their own rhythm, and they kind of are, freaked out by having to lose it now that they've got to go back to work and back to the office and, back to expectations.
Yeah, the pandemic was interesting, particularly watching people having to kind of sit with themselves now and sit with their wives and husbands and realize, oh shit, I don't really like this person, or I don't really like myself, or what am I beyond the label of my job, right? Like there was extreme disruption.
Identity, yeah, exactly.
Identity, like who am I now, right?
Yes.
And I think reflecting on my own journey, I was mentored by someone who significantly shifted. Like he's now got a lot of balance, but he set a pace in the organization we were in where he would answer emails at 4, 5 a.m. And he just set a pace for us younger people. And the messaging was like the hustle hard culture. And it was a badge of honor. I think theoretically and, anecdotally, the language is shifting on that, but whether or not it's actually being realized, I'm with you. I'm not 110% sure about that. Like, I think, I've had discussions with colleagues before where I'll run at 10 a.m. for 20 minutes or whatever. And they'll be like, oh, that's not, I'm like, dude, you smoke cigarettes for like an hour a day, bro. It's funny what people will consider not productive. And yeah, sometimes it feels counterproductive to take a run when I have a deep problem, but it actually gives me solutions, or to take a nap.
It's the solution. Yeah. The solution's right there. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I think, there's one of the major surprises in the book, actually, in the Power of the Downstate, was talking to a world champion MMA fighter, Glover Teixeira. I don't know if you've gotten to that part in the book yet, in the exercise chapter. And I didn't really know that much about exercise. I follow exercise research, but I had to really do a deep dive. And my friend John Nandor, who trains with Glover, he said, you really got to talk to this guy because he's doing it very differently, right? So he's now, I believe, 42, and he's the oldest first-time world champion of MMA. And he grew up just playing hard, working hard, training hard every day, all the time, redlining as much as possible. And that was his, that was the result he was looking for. It was like, I want to be at my absolute end, at the end of every training. And by the time he hit 36, he was failing, right? And he didn't get the world championship. And he's like, what the hell's going on? He went into full burnout mode, which is, I think, happens a lot with athletes because they just burn super bright and then they give out, right? Because your body can't take it. And then he started in with the Performance Institute in Las Vegas, but he also started reading books like, Deepak and Eckhart Tolle, and just started saying like, okay, well, what, maybe I've been doing it wrong. And then they got him on a training schedule that was like a third the amount of training he was doing. And he said he felt so much shame and guilt every day. They're like, this is all I'm doing. What are you talking about? This is all I'm doing. And his performance, because he had the training, obviously the years of training, so he had all the skill, but he needed to do at least 2/3 less. And then his training just took off.
Crazy.
And he became the oldest world champion.
You talk about set points. Because that's relevant. I think in sports we talk about adaptation.
Yeah.
Right. Like your body adapts, particularly when you sleep. Can you dive into set points? What is that?
Well, there's this concept that is in the book called Recovery Plus, right? And there's this, so if you think about just a rhythm, it just goes up and down and up and down and up and down and up. And it always kind of, you get back to some zero sum, right? And the truth is that that's not what athletes want to do, right? That's not what anybody really wants to do, right? You want to get smarter, faster, stronger, all those things. And so in sports, there's this idea of compensation and supercompensation. It's sort of, running off that idea to say that it's in the downstate, right? It's in the recovery time where you're making up all the glycogen, where you're generating all the energy that you need to repair, restore yourself from what you just did, the day before, but also to give yourself a little bit of extra so that you can push yourself a little bit harder the next time, right? And that's the recovery plus, right? So it's not actually staying at the same set point. You're constantly ratcheting your set point up. So it's a squiggly line that continues to push yourself up. But the only way that you can actually accelerate and make that thing go, on a diagonal is by spending more time in the downstate. And that's the sort of, I think in some cases, it feels like the opposite of what you think you should be doing, right? You should be pushing yourself harder. And it seems antithetical to success is to actually relax. But I think that, he proves it, people and a lot of pro athletes now are really considering this, right? I mean, I think you can talk about that, right? It's just how important it is for your emotional state, but for your physical state as well, for your heart, to just stay in a relaxed state for as long as possible. Like for his week of, I think they were in Dubai or something for his fight week, where he won, he spent 20 hours a day in bed.
Wow. Yeah, and I guess for the high achiever type A person or the person that can't sit still, because that's generally what you see in a lot of these pursuits, it's almost like ripping their own face off to really stop. Because if I'm moving, I'm productive. If I'm moving towards something. And you're quite right. I mean, in the world of ultra running, you can feel, like I can feel when I go for a run, if I'm going to get sick. You're always on a knife's edge when you're training at that level of sickness. And when you just those 2 hours, Mike, because I've got babies, like, I woke up a little bit too early. I can feel it in my body. Like, okay, if I don't sleep or rest well tonight, I'm going to be sick tomorrow. And that was really the final lesson to me around how important sleep and rest is versus just throwing more activity at it. Because if you're not recovering, you're not getting stronger, and you can actually feel it in your body.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about the autonomic system, because I've got a friend who he's a managing director at Accenture, and he's like well into it now. It's like he loves it. And he's doing talks there, and he's been sending me some stuff. And I've come to realize that I feel that for many years I was living in a panic attack without even knowing it. And I was medicating through drugs and alcohol. I do a lot of things throughout the day that I feel help me regulate my nervous system. But generally, there's even now, I've been many years sober, this subtle anxiety, which is probably enhanced through coffee and shit like that. But can you unpack that? Because I think it's really relevant for a lot of our audience that are in high pressure gigs. They're always on. What is that? What's the autonomic system?
So As a neuroscientist, people have spent so much time thinking about the central nervous system, which is the brain. But the autonomic nervous system has really gotten the short shrift, which is it's the part of the body, it's the part of yourself that is regulating all of your basic water and power functions, making sure that your heart is speeding up when it has to, slowing down when it should. It's regulating your stress responses. There's two different branches. One is the sympathetic, what I call rev in the book. It revs you up, and it's the stress response. And immediately afterwards, you have the parasympathetic, which I call restore, come in and try to calm you down, right? And so there's these twin systems that are constantly interacting on different scales. Even the inhale, that's a big sympathetic response, and then the exhale is a slow calming down of the heart rate. So basically you're gobbling up, you're trying to speed up the heart rate to get as much oxygen on the inhale, and then you're slowing the heart rate down when there's no more oxygen to be more efficient. So, and that's one scale, right? But then there's also your fear response, like a sudden stress response that you're experiencing. You're going to get your hands all sweaty, you're going to shunt the blood and liquids to your extremities to make sure you can run if you need to make sure that you can, your pinpoint eyes to make sure you can see everything you need to. And then the second you realize, okay, that is, the proverbial tiger is not a tiger, then you can calm yourself down, right? You can bring your heart rate right down. You can bring your liquids back to whatever was digesting, or, calming your mind down as well. It's very much in tune with your emotional system. And so now, my research actually in my lab has been showing that the stuff that goes on in the central nervous system is 100% interacting with your body, because your body is telling you all this information, right? And so many people try to ignore this information, and they just let this, as you were saying, you live in this constant panic attack, right? And what is a panic attack? It's shallow breathing. Its heart is racing. It's basically like always on the edge of jumping out of your skin, right? Well, that basically means that your restore system isn't doing its job, right? It's not putting you into a state of deep breathing where you're telling your body, I have control of my breath, and I have control of my environment. I have control of the world around me, and I can self-regulate. I can choose when to run, and I can choose when to calm down. And so much of that is controlled by your breath, something so simple. And the breath is controlled by the parasympathetic restorative system. And the connection between the restorative system is directly connected to your frontal lobe, which is that executive at the front of the brain that's basically making all the big decisions and, inhibiting this behavior and turning on that behavior and focusing your working memory and your selective attention. And the stronger your restore system, the stronger your frontal lobe, that there's a bidirectional relationship between your ability to calm yourself down and your ability to think well. And so you can basically train either one of those. You can train your frontal lobes through executive function tasks and working memory and all those kind of brain games, and you'll actually see benefits to the restore system. So you can see greater, heart rate variability. You can see greater ability to calm yourself down and regulate your emotions. But you can also see that when you work on increasing your restorative response, you see better frontal lobe functioning, because that system of self-control is interactive. So there's a lot of benefit to really understanding that relationship between the sympathetic, parasympathetic, and how it's very much related to what's going on in your brain as well.
I'd be interested to know what the studies are like on individuals that live in cities versus kind of rural or slower pace living in respect to all this stuff. Is there anything out there, or is it like...
There definitely is. So there's stuff out there in terms of exercise, that if you exercise in nature, you bring your heart rate, you exercise longer, and you also have a better restorative response after. So, that you're better able to regulate that ratio between the rev and the restore ratio. So for sure, and that's that getting in touch with nature, right? Getting out of the cement under your feet and getting out of all the noise of the city, and being able to just have a moment of breathing all the good phytochemicals from the trees and from whatever nature you have around you. So there is a lot of evidence to say that spending more time in rural nature settings is better for your health.
As we start to close out, Sara, first of all, just want to really thank you for the time and the insights. Love the conversation, and I really, truly loved reading your books.
Thank you.
For sure. What are some habits that people could start to implement to move towards a better relationship between downstate and upstate? Just simple stuff.
So simple stuff, I would say, is in the morning, you want to set your circadian rhythm up the best way possible, and to get outside in the sun, to get bright light. And if you don't have access to bright light, if you're in, a winter landscape that's super gray, get yourself a all spectrum light. That first signal of the day, and just sit there for 15 minutes. That first signal of the day is what it's the downbeat for your whole rhythm that will last for the next 24 hours. It will help you be more alert during the day. Your whole arousal system will be turned on, but it will also help you decrease your arousal at night and be able to keep more consolidated sleep at night. I would also say engage that slow, deep breathing, that restorative, training up that restorative response whenever you can during the day. We do so much halting of our breath. We stop breathing. People call it email apnea. You open your computer and you just stop breathing. And so engaging that deep restorative response as much as you can to tell yourself that you've got this, that you're okay during the day. Give your cardiovascular system a break by just lying on the floor and put your legs up the wall, instead of having to work constantly against gravity to have you pumping your blood all the way through your body. Like, give that heart a break and do like 10 minutes up the wall. Front load your calories so that you're getting more of your nutrients when you have the highest metabolism. Think about the rhythm of your exercise. The earlier you do your HIIT stuff, the earlier you do cardiovascular intense stuff, the better your sleep will be, right? So all these systems are interactive. So that's just, I like to focus on what you could do during the day. And then there's obviously a bunch of stuff that happens at night, but I think all of that sets you up for better sleep at night.
One of the interesting things there, and this may be an anomaly, is I find because of my work during the day, if I run too early and I run hard, I get rooted during the day, and I'm a bit off the mark, particularly if I'm with clients. So I find whilst not ideal because my energies are low, if I run around 3, it puts me in a space where I can slowly come home and then move closer into the fatigue when I need to be asleep. Does that make sense? It's an interesting one, but I think the key there is just it's a continual experimentation for me around work, kids, and training. But I think you would agree, it's just about being intentional, right? And finding out what works for you with your life, right? Yeah.
That's exactly
be curious.
Be curious. There's so many people who are like, well, I could never run in the morning. I've got this and that, and kids and all that, And so then, figure it out, right?
Figure it out.
But I wouldn't push it to too late at night, because people, there's a lot of evidence to say that that's going to harm the sleep. So what can you do within that? Just knowing the system understanding how you work, then optimizing within your own abilities.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right, Sarah, well, we'll leave it there. I'm going to let you go enjoy your fun in the sun there in Santa Fe. I'll be in California back home on Sunday. I'm going to be in the Bay Area for a month, so I'm looking
Nice.
forward to it.
Oh,
Yeah.
that would be great.
Yeah. So where can our audience learn more about you, find the books and stuff?
My website is saramednick.com, and that, has links to buy the book, but it also has a ton of different videos and other podcasts and other interviews I've done, and some talks and some lessons on sleep. So I'm also on Twitter, Sara_Mednick. I'm also on Instagram, Sarah, I love you more.
I love it. Oh, she reveals a little bit more about herself on
Right?
Instagram, right? Yeah, you got, yeah. Look,
Work it.
I really enjoyed this book. I think this book was, you showed more of your personality probably in this book, and it was great.
Well, the first book was written with a friend of mine, and he was really the writer. I was sort of more the scientist, but this book was really me writing it.
You can tell there's a difference. It's informative, obviously, but less technical, right?
Yeah.
It's written with your flavor, so it's
For
really
sure.
enjoyable. Highly recommended. I've already recommended it to some friends.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, for sure. So anyways, we'll wrap up there. Thank you so much for
Thanks.
your time, Sarah.